Thank you, and what a friendly audience. Honored to be here and humbled really through these 3 days. My complaint is that it's passed all too quickly. So we need to meet on the next conference very soon, and hopefully the next year will bring more joy and more learning. I'm ever so grateful to the organizing team here, ITS, and of course to the Platform Cooperativism Consortium, without whom I would not have, in my own learning curve, have reached this point. So I have a lot, I think, to be thankful for. So today I'm going to take you through a little bit of a case study and then provide what comes from my organization as a collective knowledge production exercise. Of course, this is a little bit of theory, but I don't think it's all too boring, for the reason that as a feminist, I believe that theory and practice are two sides of the coin. And I do hope, therefore, that I will be held accountable to that. So if there's any hole in the armor that, reveals something that is like a theoretical blind spot, please highlight that for me. So I just start. I'm going to monitor my time. Yes. Okay. So the presentation I'm going to make today is called the Collectivist Cookbook for the Platform Economy. And I come from a context in which there are millions of collectives, self-help groups, cooperatives, and the idea of economic enterprise as a collective endeavor is extremely deep-rooted in... Is it okay? No? I need to keep it there? Okay, it's echoing. Okay, then I have to shift this. Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so yes. So where I'm going to start is with the Benklerian dream. Most of you may be familiar with Yochai Benkler. And he is an Israeli-American scholar. He's a lawyer. And at the turn of the millennium, Benkler published the iconic idea, which all of us were struggling to really name, which is the wealth of networks. And this book really actually somehow gave impetus to many organizations to actually be born in some way. And this was a techno-optimistic reading of the Networked Information Society, and Benkler really wrote with great conviction that the networked information economy was going to result in significant redistribution of wealth, and it would lead to new business models in terms of a mixture of individuals and social groups on the one hand, and on the other hand, businesses that reshape their models to take advantage of and build tools and platforms for the new productive social relations. So what was being heralded here is a new paradigm, a new production relations paradigm. And this, it was hoped, would catalyze a macro-level institutional transformation grounded in collaboration and based on the logic of abundance, because we were already witness to an economy where there was artificial scarcity of knowledge. However, this story all of us know, and the reason I'm going over this story on the last day of a conference where all of us have consensus about this is because sometimes it's useful to know the problem statement for us to be able to identify what the person who's talking about is really thinking about in terms of solutions, or in terms of the pegs or the nodes from where there might be solutions. So I think in this conversation, I do believe that it's useful to understand what my problem statement is, so we understand what may be a theory of change. So by the 2010s, we know what happened to the idea of the sharing economy, which was gaining ground. There were, of course, claims about community sharing of underutilized private assets, the sweating your assets, and a hope that you would move away from faceless consumerism and the alienation, and even more hope that powerless workers were going to control their lives. But the sharing economy, which was, of course, preceded by a kind of a global economic crisis in Europe, turned out to be nothing more than digital capitalism appropriating the internet's affordances. The internet's affordances for decentralization, only to centralize profits and economic power through the dominant platform business model. So to decode the capitalist platform business model, again, something that James was talking about preaching to the choir, we know this. There is a perpetual gatekeeping and control of possible transactions in the market and ultimately convergence of various markets towards large-scale economic domination. And this drive for perpetual expansion is built into this model. Higher the number of users and interconnections, stronger the networked data advantage, and greater the potential for value extraction through rent seeking. Lots of words. But basically, the important thing to note here is that there is a blurring of boundaries between the firm and the market and society. So in some sense, all of this is a royal mess, and those boundaries really go away in this platform model. Some scholars have also called this techno-feudalism, and this is one of my personal favorites. The current conjuncture is an institutional transmutation from knowledge capitalism to a new techno-feudalism. The room is usually divided in two, between those who feel that capitalism has not changed, it's just the same, and others who believe that it is changing. But regardless, it might be useful to identify why in the current conjuncture there is a particular discontinuity. So to understand historical continuities and discontinuities is really our job, so that we can speak on behalf of and work with those who do not have voice. So what is the techno-feudal condition? The key processes here are fragmentation and extra-economic expropriation. Why extra-economic? Because we're talking about society being subsumed within the economy, an old Paulinian idea, but coming back in the form of techno-feudalism. Just as feudal lords both exploited peasants and held juridical authority over them, so today economic actors exercise political power on the basis of the terms and conditions they set. And this is important to note because I will come back in the end to these ideas of how private commercial interests are displacing public law through confidentiality agreements. Again, James spoke about trade secrets. Dismantling of public regulatory agencies, creating a fragmented form of legally sanctioned private jurisprudence. With the privatized parcelation of sovereignty, so you really don't know who to point fingers at. That is the opacity, right? So the powers that be are spread out in some kind of multi-stakeholder configuration, which is quite chaotic. And this political authority and economic power coming together is really the new amalgamation. Now, the interesting thing is techno-feudalism is to data imperialism what industrial capitalism is to historical imperialism. That means economic relations and political authority and sovereignty are closely intertwined. So you can ad nauseum debate whether this is the project of settler colonialism, is this imperialism? We are not getting there. What we are saying is that economic and political power are very closely related. And just to take you a little bit into Lenin, yesterday we saw Trotsky, so I don't want to be left behind. The concentration of production and capital has developed to such a high stage that it has created monopolies which play a decisive role in economic life. So who are these? Well, the secret is platform monopolies rule the roost. The second Leninist characteristic is the merging of bank capital with industrial capital, and now the centralizing command capital of data-based intelligence. So you are able to have a God's eye view of things because you have the analytics power coming from data. And the creation on the basis of this finance capital of financial oligarchy. So all of us know the data holdings of asset management companies is what is really pushing the platform economy. The assetization of life, as Kane Birch talks about it. The export of capital as distinguished from the export of commodities acquires exceptional importance. So this is the context of venture capital. the formation of international monopolist capitalist associations, which are really powerful. So if you went to the World Trade Organization, the GAFAM is superbly organized. So they're all a lobby group, and they will convince you that opening up your economy, your digital economy, is very good for skilling young women. And then you will come back from there having signed on the dotted line because you genuinely believe in the global south that the GAFAM is going to create jobs for your unskilled daughters. The territorial division of the whole world among the biggest capitalist powers is now complete, and as UNCTAD, the UN Commission on Trade and Development's report, says there is going to be a new bipolarity, perhaps, and which is already evident because between the Chinese and the US, we really have the AI superpowers, with the EU struggling to actually put its finger into the poisoned pie. The struggle, therefore, and this is where I want to transition from the problem statement into what it is that we want to reclaim. And that, I think, is if we want to leave techno-feudalism behind, that struggle is tied in with the struggle to overturn the global geopolitical dynamic of data imperialism in the international order. So we cannot be only talking about our cooperatives. We, of course, have to be talking about them, but we have to locate our ideals of cooperativism within this larger scene. So the human condition in this feudal imperial data complex is really also colony. A lot of people talk about colonization. And this is essentially the international division of labor through which a new race to the bottom is being orchestrated. We heard about it in the previous panel as well. And this indeed is the paradox of networked hierarchies, right? We're all supposed to be in this flat network with weak and strong ties, with serendipity and whatnot. But in the new data value chains, we see new manifestations of gendered and racialized labor exploitation, a troubling ascetization of the environment through projects that the World Economic Forum leads, like the Earth Bank of Codes. Do you know about this project? The Earth Bank of Codes? Yes? No? How many people know of the project? The Earth Bank of Codes. Well, the project is really an utopic idea of codifying the bioresources in the oceans and in natural habitat, particularly in the Pacific, in order to power big pharma and personalized medicine. So this is about going into the deep sea and really developing the digital sequence information for the Earth. And this is privately owned. This particular database is privately owned. So we are operating in an economy where markets are neither free nor equal, and where the human condition is condemned to a feudal imperial data complex that strips society of its right to self-determination, and very, very notably, some societies more than others. So where is the solution? And the solution in the literature is also with, importantly, the large and significant body of work on platform co-ops. And Trevor, I'm taking the liberty to quote you, and this is one of my favorite quotes. How do you rip the algorithmic heart of Uber and then embed your own values instead? So this is the digital version of traditional cooperativism to harness the computational architecture of platform infrastructures for furthering cooperative enterprises. So the attempt is to enable workers, producers, consumers to own and control platform infrastructures, to appropriate platform affordances for a decentralized economy where value may eventually be fairly distributed. So there are, of course, there are different ways to depict this, but if we really look at the three essential ingredients, there's co-ownership, there's democratic governance, and there's data stewardship for democratizing data value. And at an economy-wide level, I'm introducing the idea of the commonsification of data value. I think it's important to distinguish between commonsification of data and commonsification of data value. We are not talking really about taking data and putting it everywhere, but we are talking about a very important, societally, democratically engineered process of determining what kind of public social value of data we really need for the people. And through this process, we build an economy that's regenerative. We put in place institutions that are bottom-up governance structures with diverse communities, and we commonsify data values so that we can eventually establish the societal right to self-determination. What will it take to realize this kind of vision of open cooperativism? This is not really simple at all, because we saw that the international order, with all the powers that be which are hobnobbing in Geneva or New York, really to influence the UN, they are all powerful. So to reappropriate data-based intelligence, we need more than a leap of faith in self-institutionalization. So even if you were to have an utopia where all the cooperatives of the world are federated, one may not be too sure that certain other potentially cooperativizable collectives are able to make it. So there are collectives that may not be able to make it because they really need more than just self-organization. And it's only through, as Papadimitriopoulos has highlighted, through institutional establishment and demonstration of certain cases where commons-based peer production can gain public trust and involvement, that we will be able to reconcile freedom and equality in ways that can benefit individuals and collectivities. You know, I have really been intrigued in recent times, and yesterday's phenomenal panel of technologists who spoke to the humanities so profoundly. You know, I have really always been thinking about what is this thing about trust in blockchain, right? I mean, we talk about humanizing trust, but actually it's a very simple old term. It's public trust. So trust is not cybersecurity. Trust is not a transaction based on an OTP. Trust is public trust. Trust is when I know that I'm safe in this room, right? So I think that we need to restore and reclaim ideas of trust in these human-machine assemblages. And of course, this distributive justice in the international order is very, very important. And I think the municipalism movements in the West, in Europe, have taught us a lot. But at IT for Change, we often struggle with how we can actually embrace those conditions in our chaotic and imperfect context. Not, of course, to say that Europe is not chaotic or imperfect, but to say that we live in a country, I come from India, where we are actually performing much worse than we did last year on the hunger index, on the child malnutrition index. And ours is perhaps the only country whose GDP is going up, but the labor participation of women is going down. So we are faced with such challenges at the macro structural levels that it's really important to understand how questions of sustainable production, egalitarianism, sovereignty, all of this can be part of a larger social contract. And the real politic of international development, the way in which the SDGs are negotiated, financing is organized, the official development assistance, the bilateral cooperation, the lending institutions, the IFIs, international financial institutions, all of this are extremely important, as also are questions of trade and e-commerce. So what this means is that the ideals of open cooperativism need a concrete agenda for a multi-scalar international transformation that can harness data value towards global to local economic democracy. So the missing piece somewhere is the institutional arrangements. And we need to ask the question, what kind of institutional order can support a transformative platform ecosystem? I agree with Raphael that ecosystem seems to be a slightly difficult word. I would like to have a conversation, but I also think it resonates with the fact that inherently ecological systems, natural ecosystems, you know, the term comes from the environment and climate debates. Natural ecosystems are not just unpredictable, right? Sometimes they can simply implode. So you don't know what's going wrong where. So in some sense, I think when we talk about the economics, and the context of economics and political economy in society, we need to account for those unpredictabilities. So the question also is, how can data value be commonsified to reconcile what Papadimitriopoulos has highlighted in terms of reconciling freedom and equalities in ways that can benefit individuals and collectivities. So I'm going to take you through a quick tour of the case study of Kerala Food Platform in India. Southern state of Kerala, a tiny state, currently also is a minority in the federal system because it has left government in power. And it's an uphill task for the government to be not called out by the right-wing brigade on social media, constantly battling the optics. So this food platform that's being developed is to leverage data value for supporting a statewide cooperative network, focusing on the production and distribution of safe-to-eat organic food. Kerala has among the highest incidence of cancer caused by extreme depletion of soil quality in the country. So this particular idea engages about 1,600 primary agriculture societies, cooperative societies, banks, 3,300 plus dairy cooperatives, and it imagines that 11,000 plus cooperatives in the state will be functional in this larger platform, focusing only on food. Of course, all of this is in the blueprint now. It's not yet rolled out, but in the next 2 years, I really hope that representatives of this platform will be able to come and speak about this initiative in this conference. Launched in 2020 state budget, and this is significant because any visionary statement has to be met with commitment in the form of brass tacks, in the currency. So this is a pilot that was initiated just so that they can test the waters. So the scale is not yet there. They just wanted to test the waters through a pilot in a place called Palliyakkal through a service cooperative bank. And the bank became, put itself in the driving seat, and it said that it's going to drive it. Of course, the State Department that is is really the orchestrator is the Kerala Development and Innovation Strategic Council. I already mentioned that there are highly fragmented land holdings in India. So some of the challenges for agriculture in India is because land holdings are very small. This is very different from the classic US farmlands. And the average landhold size in the state is 0.18 hectares. That's a very small size, and a preponderance of very small cultivators, nearly 100%. So you pretty much have like a homestead. You have your home, and you have a small piece of land, and you might grow vegetables and something else. And there is an increasing shift in the recent past towards cash crops, which is really affecting the ways in which food security is being addressed in the state, because people are growing to export rather than growing to consume, and the environmental costs. This is what Dr. Unnikrishnan, who is the member secretary of the KDISC, which is the Kerala State Innovation Strategic Council, says. We are onboarding farmers through a collectivist logic, through cooperatives and producer organizations. Data from the transactions will be utilized to build farmer support services, such as crop insurance, predictive analytics, and initiating new value-added services. So I'm going to take you a little bit into Palliyakkal's pilot project. So now to the cooperative bank. So from the state to the cooperative bank. The bank was established in 1943. In 2000, it had a major crisis, and it looked like it would fold up. But it then revived itself, and there are now nearly 1,000 members, and those members are organized in 28 cooperative self-help groups. And it has a relatively healthy financial status. Last year's profit was about $60,000. The services provided by the bank are inputs about sapling, fish stock, poultry, cattle, loans, agriculture extension advice, coordination of farm labor, and a rota system, the old commons, right? You don't all have to own various implements. If I own some implements, then you can borrow my implements. Procurement of produce is a guaranteed price, which is very, very important, which is the minimum support price, because when there are vagaries in the market, as well as climatic conditions, then you're assured of a minimum price, value-add services, and end distribution and marketing. And of course, understandably, farmers are very proud of their cooperative. So these are two farmers. Agriculture is hard work and is increasingly difficult. Sourcing farm labor these days is difficult. No one does this kind of job anymore. We can no longer predict the rains and weather, and this leads to huge crop losses. We don't have guaranteed returns, but it's because of the services of the bank that our local government still has a farm sector. So, and Dr. Unnikrishnan proudly says, this is not an app. He says, this is not an app. It's really building that kind of societal ecosystem. So the marketplace is basically an app designed with a traceability feature to strengthen the marketing of vegetable produce. They use a QR code, very simple at this point in time, no blockchain. Vegetable produce aggregated at cooperative procurement point and stock entered into the backend, and retail orders are sourced through a consumer group that has been onboarded for the pilot. And they have upcoming plans. They really want to now launch the app in a couple of months and hope to bring on board all produce from different self-help groups, not just vegetables, because you can't break even just selling vegetables, which are also perishable, right? And this region grows a particular salt-resistant rice because it is the coastal area and it has a GI tag, a geographic indication tag, and it's called the Pokali rice. So they really want to market this as well, and those are bags of rice. And they want to really onboard the profiles of the self-help group members onto this database. And all business processes of the cooperative are going to be datafied for predictive analytics, and database decision-making will be embedded in techno-institutional processes. They are not going to purchase analytics from private cloud service platforms in the mainstream data market. And I'd like to draw your attention to what the cooperative bank secretary proudly said, that for them it's important that the member representatives who are the monitoring committee should have adequate information and analysis to be able to make a decision about the bank. So one of the things the bank will do is therefore become the steward of the data analytics. So there is a federated network scale linking cooperatives to market enterprises on a publicly owned platform backbone. Why is it publicly owned? Okay. And there is actually going to be labor cooperatives to produce a cooperative linkage, business enterprises that provide value-add services to producer cooperatives, and end consumers to a federated food label of aggregated produce from cooperatives across the state. The second is platform infrastructure geared to further generative data value creation and equitable data value distribution. The data belongs to the cooperatives, yes, but the data also belongs to the state. It's really important to understand that data is an inalienable resource, right? So at some level, it's mine, but at some other level, it's ours. But it's really important that autonomy at a collective and individual level is safeguarded. So there are challenges in the form of national policies which are not kind to cooperatives, challenges in the form of free trade agreements that will take away autonomy at the local level. And in spite of all of this, this case study teaches us that there are three very important things in order for us to move towards a public institutional roadmap for platform collectivism. The first is we need a public law. It's not useful or productive just to have civil law, right? Contracts. One data trust with members, or one data trust with another data trust. That's not enough. We actually need a constitutionalism where we understand the resource governance of data as social knowledge, as a commons of network data, has to be understood to have a nested kind of accountability and reciprocity. Public financing, we saw that was important in the creation of the app, and cooperative federalism as a ground norm for digital governance. I may not have the time, but I will take you through this in the next couple of minutes. Essentially, public law for the resource governance of network data is to ensure that the de facto enclosure of network data does not happen. So there is no hope and conviction that the private sector can be persuaded to voluntarily share data. No private sector enterprise. I mean, Europe did this and they just waited forever. No open data exercise that was based on voluntarism ever worked. So it's important to understand that you need a baseline of accessibility maintained through a public law. You have to say, Uber has to turn in aggregate data sets of the city. That's it. You have to say that. You don't have to go through complicated legislation in order to then say, well, one worker can access the data that pertains to, how many miles he may have covered in the past month. What is really, we don't want to get to an individual level of the worker fighting with the state. We actually want a public law. And the second, of course, is the dedicated public investment necessary for these infrastructures. And third is a federalist structure for platform collectivism with a backbone, with a decentralized governance architecture, with sectoral data governance policies, because it may not be enough to just have agriculture data policies, right? Health is something that's very, very different. Someone famously said, all data is health data. Because even if you have location data, because oftentimes, if someone is able to observe whether I'm walking to the metro station or the bus station, they will be able to predict if my health is better or worse. So in some sense, sensitive data and non-personal data both have to come together for us to make sense, and participatory institutional arrangements. So actioning, this is the last couple of slides, so it won't take more than 2 minutes. So the efficacy of the national, subnational, institutional order to further this kind of community and public value creation in the platform economy really depends on how data sovereignty materializes in the international arena. And that is really what Benkler said so poignantly, that this is all about the battle of the institutional order. It's a battleground, right? So today, we need to overhaul the trade and IP regime. We need a new development cooperation regime internationally that is based on reparation, that's based on a right, that's not based really on ridiculous kinds of financing mechanisms of the World Bank. A transformed, networked multilateralism that puts people's participation at the center, and a new global treaty on cross-border data flows. Today, data flows are determined by trade deals. And trade deals are not the place. It's exactly like women's human rights or labor rights are negotiated in trade deals. That's not the place to negotiate them. It's the ILO that's going to set the benchmarks, or it is your labor laws in your country, right? So you don't want arm twisting by richer countries to tell you, please make your supply chain cleaner, right? We don't want anybody telling us that. So this is the necessary condition, a global data constitutionalism founded on sovereignty and justice, translated into a nested kind of institutional arrangement in which we put people's institutions at the center. And of course, for a commons-based production to gain ground eventually as a central dynamic of the economy, we do believe that the role of appropriate institutional ecosystems from global to local that can galvanize and sustain a collectivist ethos can really happen. Thank you.